A woman from the countryside finds comfort working in the home of a lonely elderly lady in the capital, but the arrival of the son's new girlfriend, ambitious and manipulative, threatens to destroy that bond with lies and forgery. Faced with injustice, the maid bravely stands up to protect the one who welcomed her, turning pain into a new beginning. It was a March morning when Iris Spencer disembarked at the New Orleans bus terminal, carrying only a worn suitcase and the hope of better days. At 42, she had left behind the small town of Oak Creek, in rural Louisiana, where drought and lack of opportunities had turned her daily life into a constant struggle for survival. "My God, give me strength," she murmured, as she observed the frenetic movement of New Orleans. The humid heat of the coastal city contrasted with the parched countryside she knew. Just as the noise of cars and the sea of hurried people differed from the slow, familiar rhythm of her hometown, Iris took a deep breath and pulled the crumpled paper from her floral skirt pocket. The address, written in neat handwriting, indicated the Garden District, an affluent area of the city. Saving the little money she had, she decided to take a bus instead of a taxi. She would need every cent to send to her 3 children who remained under her sister's care. When she finally arrived at her destination, she was momentarily paralyzed before the imposing colonial mansion. Painted in a light yellow that reflected the sunlight, it had wide carved wooden windows, an exuberant garden, and a veranda that encircled the entire facade. It was the kind of residence Iris had only seen in magazines or soap operas. With her heart pounding, she rang the doorbell. She expected to be greeted by an employee, but was surprised when the door opened, revealing an elegant lady with completely white hair and an upright posture, despite her advanced age. "You must be Iris," she said with a firm but gentle voice. "I am Eleanor Maxwell. Welcome to my home." Mrs. Eleanor was 78 years old and had been a widow for over a decade. Her late husband, Edward Maxwell, had been one of the biggest entrepreneurs in the cotton industry in Louisiana. The accumulated fortune allowed her to live in comfort, but money did not fill the void left by her companion's absence and the estrangement of her only son. "The house is too big for me alone," Mrs. Eleanor commented as she showed Iris around the premises. "Charles Edward lives in New York City. He manages the family businesses from there and rarely comes to visit me." The mansion was a silent testament to a privileged life: carefully preserved rosewood furniture, silverware gleaming under the light, streaming through the windows, paintings by renowned artists, and a vast library with leather-bound books. The scent of lavender and beeswax filled the air, mingling with the aroma of the jasmine growing in the garden. "I hope you feel at home," Mrs. Eleanor said, showing Iris the room where she would stay. It was simple compared to the rest of the house, but still much more comfortable than any place she had ever slept. "I usually have tea at 5. I like pecan cookies to go with it." The first few days were a period of mutual adaptation. Iris learned that Mrs. Eleanor liked to wake up early to personally tend to her orchids, that she preferred grilled fish on Fridays, that she maintained the habit of listening to classical music on Sunday afternoons, and that, despite her evident wealth, she was a woman of simple tastes and gentle demeanor. In the second week, while tidying a closet in the hallway, Iris found a photo album. She hesitated for a moment before opening it. On the first page, she saw a young Mrs. Eleanor, radiant in a lace wedding dress beside a tall, elegant man. "That was the happiest day of my life," Mrs. Eleanor's voice startled Iris, who hastily closed the album. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Eleanor. I shouldn't have—" "Don't worry," the lady interrupted, sitting in a nearby armchair. "I like to look at these photos from time to time. It keeps the memories alive." It was the beginning of a genuine closeness. On warm New Orleans nights, sitting on the veranda with the distant aroma of the sea, the two women from such different worlds began to share their stories. Mrs. Eleanor spoke about the trips she had taken with her husband, the parties she had hosted in that very house in happier times, the dreams she had realized, and those that had fallen by the wayside. Iris, in turn, told of life in the countryside, the financial difficulties after her husband's abandonment, her effort to raise her children alone, and the longing she felt for them. Gradually, Iris realized that despite all her material wealth, Mrs. Eleanor suffered from a deeper poverty, loneliness. Her son rarely called, her longtime friends had departed one by one, and the days dragged on in a solitary routine that not even books or music could completely fill. One particularly warm afternoon, while preparing a Creole fish stew in the kitchen, Iris heard a sound coming from the living room. She found Mrs. Eleanor sitting at the old piano, her trembling hands trying to play a melody, silent tears streaming down her time-worn face. "Edward loved it when I played this song," she explained, wiping away her tears as she noticed Iris's presence. Today he would have turned 85. Without a word, Iris sat beside her on the piano bench and held her hand. They remained like that for a long moment, united by a silence that spoke more than many words. From that day on, something changed between them. Mrs. Eleanor began to teach Iris how to play checkers, a pastime she used to enjoy with her husband. Iris, in turn, showed her employer how to make bobbin lace, an art she had learned from her grandmother. In the mornings, they tended the garden together. In the afternoons, Iris read aloud to Mrs. Eleanor when the lady's tired eyes prevented her from doing so alone. The relationship subtly transformed. Although they maintained the respect of their roles as employee and employer, there was now a deeper bond, a genuine affection that transcended social differences. 4 months after Iris's arrival during dinner, Mrs. Eleanor made an announcement that broke the quiet routine they had established. "Charles Edward is coming to visit me next weekend," she said, with an animation Iris had rarely seen. "And he's bringing his new girlfriend. It seems to be serious this time." Iris felt an inexplicable apprehension, but smiled in response. "We'll prepare something special to welcome them then." On Friday, the house was meticulously cleaned and tidied. Iris spent hours polishing the silverware, while Mrs. Eleanor personally supervised the arrangement of flowers picked from the garden to decorate the dining table. The menu was planned with care: shrimp and okra gumbo as a starter, seafood étouffée as the main course, and for dessert, bread pudding, which had been Charles Edward's favorite sweet since childhood. The sound of an imported car pulling into the driveway announced the visitor's arrival. Charles Edward Maxwell, a 48-year-old man, tall and with features that resembled his father's, entered the house with the ease of someone returning to their own territory after a long absence. He kissed his mother's cheek with formal affection, while his eyes already scanned the room, assessing every detail. "Mother, it's been so long. You look wonderful." Behind him, a woman entered the room, tall, thin, with meticulously styled blonde hair and a designer dress that seemed excessively formal for a family visit. She observed the surroundings with critical eyes before offering a practiced smile. "This is Patricia Vancroft," Charles Edward introduced, with evident pride. "Patricia, this is my mother, Eleanor." "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Mrs. Maxwell," Patricia said, extending a hand with perfectly manicured nails. Her gaze then fell upon Iris, who was discreetly observing the scene. "And this must be the—" "Iris," Mrs. Eleanor interrupted with unusual firmness in her voice. "She is not just my employee. She is my companion and friend." A glimmer of something obscure passed through Patricia's eyes, so quickly that only Iris noticed it. It was like a dark premonition, announcing that the tranquility of the past few months was about to be disturbed in ways neither of them could foresee. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you are watching from. Continuing. Dinner proceeded in an apparently cordial atmosphere. Charles Edward spoke animatedly about the Mendonça Company's new expansion projects in the southeast, while Patricia occasionally complimented with precise observations about the financial market. With a degree in business administration and an MBA from Harvard, she worked for a large international consulting firm that provided services to the family's business group. "That's how we met," Charles Edward explained, looking affectionately at his girlfriend. "Patricia has a brilliant mind for business. She identified opportunities that no one had noticed before." Mrs. Eleanor smiled and nodded, but Iris, who knew her well after months of daily cohabitation, noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders. There was something in the way Patricia addressed the elderly lady, an almost imperceptible condescension, like speaking to a child or someone who doesn't fully understand the world around them. "Your house is charming, Mrs. Eleanor," Patricia commented, savoring the bread pudding. "So traditional, it's almost like visiting a small colonial period museum." "Edward and I built every memory here," Mrs. Eleanor replied, with dignity. "Each piece tells a story of our life together." Of course, I understand the sentimental value, Patricia smiled, exchanging a quick glance with Charles Edward. But perhaps it's time for some renovations, don't you think, darling? A house with this potential could have a much more contemporary look with the guidance of a good interior designer. The weekend continued at this pace, seemingly innocent comments that, in reality, carried veiled criticisms. Patricia questioned the need for so many old photographs. They collect so much dust, don't they? Suggested that the garden required too much maintenance for someone of Mrs. Eleanor's age, and even insinuated that Iris's constant presence could create a detrimental emotional dependence. On Sunday night, after the couple departed back to New York City, Iris found Mrs. Eleanor on the veranda, contemplating the starry sky with a thoughtful expression. "Are you all right?" she asked, sitting in the chair beside her. "I'm just reflecting, my dear," the elderly woman replied with a sigh. "Charles Edward seems happy, and that's what matters, isn't it?" Iris hesitated before answering. "Did you like her, Patricia?" "She's different from the other girlfriends Charles Edward has brought over the years. More assertive, more present." Mrs. Eleanor paused. "Perhaps she's right about some things. Maybe I am indeed living trapped in the past." "Mrs. Eleanor," Iris held the lady's hand firmly, "this house is your home, exactly the way you like it. There's nothing wrong with preserving memories and traditions." But the seed of doubt had already been planted. In the following weeks, Patricia began to call Mrs. Eleanor daily, always with new suggestions. An interior decorator she coincidentally knew, a professional gardener to replace the amateur work in the yard, even a nutritionist to adapt the diet to the needs of old age. Charles Edward began to visit more frequently, always accompanied by Patricia. Each visit brought something new: modern decoration magazines, contemporary furniture catalogues, and eventually brochures about assisted living communities for seniors. "They are wonderful places, Mother," Charles Edward explained, showing photos of luxurious complexes. "They have 24-hour medical assistance, recreational activities, companionship from people in the same age group." "I have company here, Mrs. Eleanor replied, looking meaningfully at Iris. "And my doctor, Dr. Parker, visits me monthly. I am perfectly fine in my own home." It was on a spring afternoon, about 6 months after Patricia's first visit, that the incident happened. Mrs. Eleanor was watering her orchids when she felt a sudden dizziness. Iris, who was working in the kitchen, heard the noise of the watering can falling and ran to the garden, finding the lady sitting on the iron bench, pale and disoriented. "It was just a passing malaise," Mrs. Eleanor insisted, after drinking a glass of sugar water. "Probably the heat." Iris, however, called the family doctor, who came to examine her in the late afternoon. Dr. Parker, a gentle-mannered man who had cared for Mrs. Eleanor for decades, performed a complete checkup and found nothing alarming. "Blood pressure is normal, heart strong as ever," he concluded. "It was probably just a heat stroke episode. I recommend more fluids and avoiding midday sun, especially this time of year." The incident, however, reached Charles Edward's ears through a worried call from Iris. In less than 24 hours, he and Patricia were back in New Orleans, bringing with them a doctor they had never mentioned before. "This is Dr. Raymond Miller," Patricia introduced, "one of the most renowned geriatricians in New York. He came to do a complete assessment." Mrs. Eleanor protested, stating that she had already been examined by her trusted doctor, but Charles Edward insisted, "Mother, it's just to make sure everything is okay. Dr. Miller specializes in senior health." The specialist, a man with a serious demeanor and cold gaze, conducted a series of cognitive and physical tests. He asked Mrs. Eleanor to repeat number sequences, name objects, describe her routine. At each small hesitation or imprecision natural with age, he made notes on his clipboard, exchanging significant glances with Patricia. At the end of the evaluation, he asked to speak alone with Charles Edward and Patricia. Iris, worried, stayed close to the half-open library door where the conversation was taking place. "There are evident signs of cognitive decline," the doctor said in a grave tone. "Spatial disorientation, recent memory lapses, difficulty concentrating." These are preliminary symptoms that can evolve rapidly. That's absurd. Iris almost entered the room to protest, but restrained herself. Mrs. Eleanor showed none of these symptoms. She played checkers skillfully, remembered details from books, read decades ago, and perfectly managed her house and finances. "What is your recommendation, doctor?" Patricia asked, with a note of concern so perfectly staged that only someone very attentive would notice its falsity. "Constant monitoring to begin with, and seriously consider the possibility of an assisted environment where she can receive specialized care." Iris moved away from the door, indignant. Something was profoundly wrong with that situation. She went to Mrs. Eleanor's room, where she found her sitting at the dressing table, brushing her silver hair with methodical movements. "What did the doctor say, dear?" the lady asked, with a calm that hid her apprehension. Iris hesitated. He suggested some additional care." "He thinks I'm becoming senile, doesn't he?" Mrs. Eleanor put down the brush, staring at her own reflection in the antique mirror. "Does he think I don't notice what's happening? The glances, the whispers, the way they talk to me as if I were a child." "You are perfectly lucid," Iris stated with conviction. "Everyone who truly knows you knows that." Mrs. Eleanor smiled sadly. "The problem, my dear, is that the people who truly know me are dwindling. Edward is gone, my closest friends too, and Charles Edward. Well, Charles Edward has always trusted numbers and specialists more than his own impressions. That night during dinner, Charles Edward announced that he and Patricia would need to return to New York for a few days, but that they would come back the following weekend to discuss the next steps. After they left, Iris found on the nightstand in the guest room the couple had occupied a detailed brochure about an institution called Sunshine Haven Senior Living Community. On the back cover, there were notes about costs, admission procedures, and, more disturbingly, a date marked for 2 weeks later. A plan was underway, and Iris feared that neither she nor Mrs. Eleanor would have a say in it. Determined to protect the lady who had become practically her family, she began to observe Patricia's behavior more closely and investigate the credibility of this doctor, Miller. What she would discover in the following weeks would forever change the fate of that family. The week that followed brought a subtle but noticeable change in Mrs. Eleanor's behavior. The lady, always so confident and proud, now seemed to doubt her own abilities. She hesitated when making simple choices, like deciding the day's menu or which dress to wear. More than once, Iris found her repeatedly checking if she had locked doors or turned off the stove, murmuring to herself as if trying to convince herself of her own sanity. "You're not forgetful," Iris assured her during breakfast, after seeing Mrs. Eleanor jotting down her daily appointments that she always kept by memory. "This is perfectly normal." "I don't know anymore, dear," the elderly woman sighed with a distant look. "Maybe Charles Edward is right. Maybe I really do need special care." It was exactly what Patricia wanted, Iris realized. The manipulator was planting seeds of doubt, not only in Charles Edward's mind, but in Mrs. Eleanor herself, undermining her self-confidence day after day. Determined to better understand what was happening, Iris decided to investigate this Dr. Raymond Miller. Taking advantage of her afternoon off, she went to the neighborhood pharmacy, where the pharmacist, Mr. Oswald, knew practically all the health professionals in the area. "Miller?" the old pharmacist repeated, frowning. "I don't know any geriatrician with that name practicing in New Orleans. Are you sure he's not from New York?" "He said he practices in New York, but also here in New Orleans," Iris explained. "Strange. Geriatricians aren't that common, I'd know. I can check the State Medical Board registry if you like." 2 days later, Mr. Oswald handed Iris a folder with printed information from the State Medical Board. "I didn't find any Raymond. Miller registered as a geriatrician, neither in New Orleans nor in New York," the pharmacist explained, adjusting his reading glasses. "There's only one general practitioner with that name in Baton Rouge, but he's been retired for over 5 years. Iris felt a chill run down her spine. "So who is this man who examined Mrs. Eleanor?" "I don't know, my dear, but I suggest you keep your eyes wide open." Back at the mansion, Iris found Mrs. Eleanor dozing on the veranda, a book open on her lap. She observed her for a moment, her serene face, her tranquil breathing, her white hair framing features that, though marked by time, maintained an innate dignity. How could anyone want to remove that lady from her own home? Discreetly going up to the room the couple used when visiting, Iris began to look for more clues. In the dresser drawers, she found only clothes and personal items. On the nightstand, more brochures about senior living communities. That's when she noticed the tablet forgotten on the bed, probably left by Patricia on her last visit. She hesitated before turning it on. It was an invasion of privacy, something that went against her principles. But her concern for Mrs. Eleanor spoke louder. The screen lit up, revealing a series of open emails. One in particular caught her attention: procedures for guardianship due to incapacity. With her heart racing, Iris read the correspondence between Patricia and a lawyer. The plan was clear. Obtain a medical statement attesting to Mrs. Eleanor's incapacity to make decisions, transfer her guardianship to Charles Edward, and then take control of the family's properties and investments, including the historic mansion, valued at millions. "We have a window of opportunity now," Patricia wrote. "The sale of the company's shares to the international conglomerate needs to be signed by the end of the month. With guardianship, Charles Edward can sign on her behalf." Iris almost dropped the tablet when she heard footsteps on the stairs. She quickly turned off the device, put it back where it was, and pretended to be tidying the room when Charles Edward appeared at the door. "Iris, I didn't know you were here," he commented, looking slightly suspicious. "I came to change the towels and check if everything was in order," she replied with a forced smile. "You arrived earlier this time." "Yes, I have some matters to resolve here in New Orleans. Patricia will come tomorrow with Dr. Miller for a new assessment of Mother." That night, Iris barely slept. The puzzle pieces were beginning to fit together, and the picture they formed was disturbing. Patricia was not just interested in Charles Edward. She had an elaborate plan to take control of the Maxwell fortune, using Mrs. Eleanor's supposed mental fragility as a pretext. The next morning, Iris made a decision. She went to an electronics store in the city center and bought a small digital recorder, like those used by students to record lectures. Back at the mansion, she hid the device in different strategic locations, under the coffee table in the living room, behind books in the library, and even in the artificial flower arrangement in the entrance hall. Patricia arrived in the early afternoon alone. "Dr. Miller had an unforeseen event," she explained to Charles Edward, "but he left some cognitive tests for us to administer. They're quite simple." Iris, pretending to clean the crystal in the living room while the couple chatted on the veranda, strained her ears. "Are you sure about this, dear?" Charles Edward asked, seeming hesitant. "Mother has always been so independent. Placing her in an institution, even if it's the best in the country." "Charles," Patricia's voice took on that persuasive tone Iris already knew well, "your mother is losing the ability to care for herself. It's only a matter of time until something serious happens. Do you want to be responsible for that? Do you want her to get seriously hurt by being alone in this huge house?" "She's not alone, she has Iris. A domestic employee is not qualified to care for an elderly person with cognitive decline," Patricia cut in. "Besides, think about the assets, Charles. This house is worth a fortune, and it's practically abandoned. Your mother's investments need to be professionally managed. The company shares are losing value because she refuses to authorize the sale to the international conglomerate." Charles Edward sighed deeply. "You're right, as always. It's just that it's not easy to make this kind of decision. That's why I'm here to help you." Patricia's voice softened. "We'll do everything the right way. Dr. Miller's report, today's evaluation, and then the judge will certainly grant guardianship. It's for her own good." Iris silently walked away, her heart heavy. Charles Edward wasn't bad, just impressionable and distant from his mother's reality. Patricia, on the other hand, was calculating and manipulative, skillfully leading him down the path she desired. During the following days, Iris collected revealing recordings. In one of them, Patricia instructed the supposed Dr. Miller by phone, "No matter how lucid she seems, your report needs to emphasize mental confusion and inability to make decisions. Your compensation will be generous, as agreed." In another, she spoke with a real estate agent while thinking she was alone in the library. "As soon as we have guardianship, we can put the property on the market. The land alone is worth a fortune. Imagine with this historic mansion. Of course, we'll need to convince Charles that it's the best option, but he always ends up agreeing with me. The most alarming of the recordings came on Thursday night. Patricia, on the phone with someone who seemed to be her accomplice, discussed the next steps. The ambulance is scheduled for Monday at 10 a.m. Admission is already paid for, documents ready for signature. The son will be traveling on business, which is perfect. When he returns, it will already be a fait accompli. Iris felt a knot in her throat. They had only 4 days to prevent Mrs. Eleanor from being taken against her will to an institution. The next morning, she found the elderly lady sitting in the garden, feeding the birds that frequented the feeder, installed among the orange trees. She approached cautiously, choosing her words carefully. "Mrs. Eleanor, we need to talk about something important." The lady looked at her with her perceptive blue eyes. "It's about the plan to put me in a nursing home, isn't it?" Iris couldn't hide her surprise. "You knew?" "My dear, I am 78 years old, not 8. Mrs. Eleanor smiled melancholically. "I may not hear as well as before, but I understand what is happening around me. I saw the brochures. I noticed the conversations that cease when I enter the room. I noticed how that doctor looked at me, as if I were already mentally absent." "And why didn't you say anything?" Mrs. Eleanor sighed, looking at the horizon where the New Orleans Sea could be glimpsed in the distance. "Because he is my son, Iris. Because part of me wanted to believe that he was genuinely concerned about my well-being, not my fortune. And because—" her voice faltered slightly. "Sometimes I wonder if it wouldn't actually be better. This house holds so many memories, some too painful now that I am alone." "You are not alone," Iris took the elderly woman's hands in hers. "And you are not going anywhere against your will, I promise you that." Mrs. Eleanor's eyes shone with a new determination. "What do you suggest we do? First, you need to know what I discovered." Iris showed her the recorder. "And then we'll call your son. The real Charles Edward, not the one Patricia manipulates." That afternoon, the two women listened to the recordings together. Mrs. Eleanor remained silent, only an occasional tear betraying the pain of discovering the betrayal being plotted against her. When the last recording ended, she straightened her shoulders and spoke with a firmness Iris hadn't heard in weeks. "Call Charles Edward. Just tell him I need to speak with him urgently about a matter that cannot be discussed over the phone." "What if he's with her? What if he tells Patricia everything?" Mrs. Eleanor smiled, a spark of her old brilliance returning to her eyes. "Trust me, dear. I know my son better than he knows himself. There are things he needs to hear directly from me, and only from me." Charles Edward arrived at the mansion on Saturday morning, alone, as Mrs. Eleanor had predicted. His expression showed genuine concern, something that gave Iris a small hope that not all was lost. "Mother, what happened?" "You worried me with that phone call," he said, kissing the forehead of his mother who awaited him in the living room, upright in her favorite armchair, dressed with an elegance she hadn't displayed in weeks. "Sit down." "Son," Mrs. Eleanor replied, indicating the sofa in front of her. "We have much to discuss." Iris discreetly withdrew to the kitchen but remained attentive, respecting the agreement she had made with Mrs. Eleanor. She would give them privacy for the initial conversation between mother and son, but would be ready to intervene if necessary. From the kitchen, she could hear snippets of the conversation, Mrs. Eleanor's voice firm and clear, revived by a determination that seemed to have been reborn from the ashes of her almost destroyed dignity. Charles Edward's voice, initially defensive, then incredulous, and finally, after what Iris presumed to be the moment the recordings were played, shocked and indignant. This is impossible," he stammered when the last recording ended. "Patricia would never—" "She cares about you, Mother. These residential plans were for your comfort, your safety." "Charles Edward," Mrs. Eleanor's voice was serene but resolute, "you heard with your own ears. Her words, not mine or Iris's. Your girlfriend planned to institutionalize me against my will while you were traveling. She planned to sell this house, which is my home, where I lived with your father for over 50 years. She planned to take control of my finances, my company shares, everything we built." A long silence followed. Iris could almost visualize Charles Edward, absorbing the impact of those revelations, struggling to reconcile the image he had of Patricia with the undeniable evidence of her betrayal. "But Dr. Miller," he began, his voice now weaker. "There is no Dr. Miller, son. At least not as a registered geriatrician. We checked with the state medical board. That man is a fraud hired by her to diagnose me with a disease I don't have." More silence. Then the sound of footsteps, and Charles Edward appeared at the kitchen door, looking at Iris with a complex expression, a mixture of shame, gratitude, and despair. "You knew all this?" he asked, his voice choked. "I started to suspect when I saw how your girlfriend treated Mrs. Eleanor," Iris replied sincerely, "and then I found evidence. I recorded the conversations because I needed to prove what was happening." Charles Edward ran his hand through his hair, a gesture of anguish. "My God, how could I have been so blind? How did I not see what was right in front of me? Love sometimes blinds." "Son," Mrs. Eleanor said, having followed them to the kitchen, "and Patricia is very skilled at manipulating people. She identified your weak point, your concern for me, and exploited it perfectly." At that moment, Charles Edward's cell phone rang. On the screen, the name Patricia flashed insistently. "It's her," he said, looking at his mother and Iris. "What should I do?" "Whatever your heart tells you, my son," Mrs. Eleanor replied. "But remember that she cannot know that we discovered her plans. Not yet." Charles Edward took a deep breath and answered the phone, forcing naturalness into his voice. "Hi, dear. Yes, I'm with Mother. No, you can't come now. We're having a private conversation. Yes, I know you're worried, but... Look, we'll talk later, okay?" After ending the call, he turned to his mother and Iris, his eyes now shining with determination. "She wants to come here now. Says Dr. Miller is available for a new assessment today." "They're accelerating the plan," Iris said, alarmed. "The ambulance is scheduled for Monday, remember? We need to act fast." "Yes," Charles Edward agreed, a new conviction in his voice, "and I have exactly the idea of how to do it. But I need both of your help." The rest of that Saturday was dedicated to elaborating a meticulous plan. Charles Edward, recovering the business acumen he had inherited from his father, coordinated every detail. First, he called his trusted lawyer in New Orleans, Dr. Jeffrey Adams, a family friend for decades, explaining the situation in general terms and asking him to be available for an urgent meeting on Sunday. Next, using his contacts, he discovered that the supposed Dr. Miller was actually Miles Silver, an actor who occasionally worked as an extra in commercials in New York City. A quick search of databases revealed substantial transfers from Patricia's personal account to his in recent weeks. "She didn't need to involve my name in the financial transactions," Charles Edward explained bitterly. "Since we've been together for almost a year, I have a power of attorney that allows me to move joint accounts in her name for company matters. The trust—" "It was a one-way street," Mrs. Eleanor completed gently. Meanwhile, Iris organized all the recordings, copying them to a USB drive that Charles Edward would hand over to the lawyer. She also prepared printed copies of the emails she had found on Patricia's tablet, documenting the plan step by step. "The most important thing now is to ensure she doesn't suspect anything until we're ready," Charles Edward emphasized during dinner. "I'll tell her I spent the day helping Mother organize documents, that I'm tired, and that we'll meet for lunch tomorrow." "And what about the fake consultation with the fake doctor?" Iris asked. "I'll say Mother wasn't feeling well and that we'll reschedule for Monday." He paused, a sad smile on his lips. "Ironic, isn't it? Monday is exactly when they planned to take her away." On Sunday morning, while Charles Edward was meeting with the lawyer, Mrs. Eleanor and Iris prepared for the next phase of the plan. The lady, recovered from her brief crisis of confidence, regained control of her life with surprising vitality. "You know, Iris," she said as she styled her hair in front of the mirror, "this experience, however painful, brought something good. It showed me that I still have the strength to fight for what is mine." And it showed Charles Edward the value of truth. Iris smiled, helping her choose the pearl necklace that would complete her elegant look. "You've always been strong, Mrs. Eleanor. You just needed to be reminded of it." At noon, Charles Edward returned from the meeting with the lawyer, accompanied by Dr. Jeffrey. The plan was ready to be executed. Dr. Jeffrey analyzed all the evidence. Charles Edward explained, "The recordings are absolutely admissible, especially since they reveal a plan to defraud legal documents and deprive Mother of her freedom. What makes this particularly serious," added the lawyer, a middle-aged man with a grave expression, "is the falsification of medical reports and the attempt to obtain legal guardianship under false pretenses." This could result in severe legal consequences for those involved. "I don't want Patricia in jail," Mrs. Eleanor intervened, surprising everyone. "I just want my life back, my peace. And I want Charles Edward to see clearly who he was getting involved with, before it was too late." "I understand perfectly, Mrs. Eleanor," Dr. Jeffrey replied with a slight smile. "And that's why I suggested the approach we're going to take. Direct confrontation, with irrefutable evidence but in a private setting. No unnecessary scandals, no lawsuits, unless she insists on taking things further after being exposed." The plan was simple in its conception, but would require perfect timing in execution. Charles Edward would invite Patricia for lunch at the mansion, under the pretext of finalizing the details for Mrs. Eleanor's supposed institutionalization the next day. Dr. Jeffrey would be present as a financial advisor, supposedly to guide them on the transition of assets. "And me?" Iris asked. "What will be my role?" "The most important of all," Charles Edward replied with new respect in his eyes. "You will be our key witness. After all, you were the one who discovered everything, who protected my mother when I failed to do so." In the afternoon, everything was prepared. The table was set on the veranda, with the discreet elegance that had always characterized the Maxwell residence. Iris, dressed in a simple but formal outfit that Mrs. Eleanor had insisted on giving her as a gift, waited in the kitchen. The digital recorder was strategically placed under the sideboard to record everything that would be said. At 2 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. Charles Edward, who had maintained a facade of normalcy in his messages to Patricia throughout the weekend, went to greet her. "Darling, I missed you." Patricia's honeyed voice sounded in the entrance hall. "I brought a surprise for your mother, an album with photos of Sunshine Haven. I'm sure when she sees how wonderful the place is, she'll be excited about the move." Iris exchanged a significant look with Mrs. Eleanor, who was sitting in her armchair in the living room, waiting with the dignity of a queen. The confrontation that would forever change the fate of that family was about to begin. Patricia entered the living room with the confidence of someone who believes they have total control of the situation. Impeccably dressed in a beige linen suit, hair pulled back in an elegant bun, she smiled as if she were about to close the deal of her life. "Mrs. Eleanor, how are you feeling today?" she asked with false solicitude, approaching to kiss the elderly woman's cheek. "Surprisingly lucid," the lady replied, with a touch of irony that seemed to go unnoticed by Patricia. "That's good to hear. I brought some photos to show you." Patricia opened her designer bag, pulling out a glossy covered album. "Sunshine Haven is truly a paradise for people in your situation." At that moment, Dr. Jeffrey entered the room, followed by Charles Edward. Patricia paused, looking confused at the man she didn't know. "Darling, I didn't know we'd have company for lunch," she commented, trying to maintain her smile. "Patricia, this is Dr. Jeffrey Adams, the family lawyer for many years," Charles Edward introduced with a formality that made Patricia's smile falter slightly. "Lawyer, I thought the matter was already decided. We just need the papers for Mrs. Eleanor's temporary transfer to the Haven while we handle the guardianship." Dr. Jeffrey smiled politely, shaking Patricia's extended hand. "Actually, madam, I'm here to discuss a different legal matter." Iris entered the room at that moment, carrying a tray with water and coffee. Patricia shot her an annoyed glance, as if her presence were an intrusion. "Iris doesn't need to participate in this conversation," she said, with a dismissive gesture. "These are family matters." "On the contrary," Mrs. Eleanor intervened with a firm voice, "Iris is practically family, and she has every right to be here. In fact, it is thanks to her that we are having this conversation." A glimmer of apprehension crossed Patricia's face. Her eyes moved quickly between those present, assessing the situation. "I don't understand. What is all this about?" Charles Edward approached, his expression now serious. "Patricia, we found the recordings. We know everything. About the fake doctor. About the plan to forcibly institutionalize my mother tomorrow. About the attempt to take control of the family's assets." Patricia's face paled momentarily, but she quickly regained her composure. "What absurdity is this? What recordings?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "I'm genuinely concerned about Mrs. Eleanor's well-being." "I believe this will clarify any doubts," Dr. Jeffrey said, taking a tablet from his jacket and pressing the play icon. Patricia's voice filled the room. "Admission is already paid for. Documents ready for signature. The son will be traveling on business, which is perfect. When he returns, it will already be a fait accompli. A second recording followed, even more incriminating. As soon as we have guardianship, we can put the property on the market. The land alone is worth a fortune. Imagine with this historic mansion. Patricia listened to everything in sepulchral silence, her face a rigid mask that occasionally twisted into expressions of outrage, indignation, and finally, defeat. When the last recording ended, the one where she instructed the fake Dr. Miller about the fabricated diagnosis, she attempted one last defense. These recordings were clearly manipulated, she said, her voice trembling slightly. It's the word of an employee against mine. Charles, darling, you can't believe this. We also have the emails, Patricia, Charles Edward replied with evident sadness. The ones you exchanged with the lawyer about guardianship due to incapacity. And we tracked the payments to the actor who impersonated the doctor. Patricia's facade finally crumbled. Her face transformed, revealing the coldness and calculation that had remained hidden behind the mask of concern and affection. She straightened her shoulders and looked directly at Charles Edward, all pretense of innocence abandoned. Everything I did was for both of us, she said with a new hardness in her voice. Your mother is old, Charles. This house, the fortune, the company shares, all of this would eventually be yours. I merely accelerated the process. At the cost of her freedom and dignity, Charles Edward retorted, incredulous at the transformation of the woman he thought he loved. Dignity? Patricia laughed, a cold, humorless sound. She's wasting away here in isolation, clinging to old furniture and memories. The company's shares lose value every day because she refuses to modernize, to expand. How much money have we already lost because of her stubbornness? Millions. Mrs. Eleanor, who until then had observed everything with serenity, slowly rose from her armchair. Despite her age, her presence commanded respect. When she spoke, her voice was calm but laden with authority. Patricia, I'm going to tell you something my husband used to repeat. Money is earned, lost, and earned again. But character once lost is rarely recovered. She paused, her eyes assessing the young woman before her. You could have been part of this family, honestly. Charles Edward loved you. I could have learned to like you, if your intentions were genuine. But you chose the path of dishonesty. Patricia stared at the elderly woman, a mixture of anger and contempt in her gaze. You're naive, Mrs. Eleanor. The business world doesn't operate with those antiquated notions of character. It operates with strategy, with vision, with the courage to do what's necessary. What you intended to do was not business, Dr. Jeffrey intervened with a professional voice. It was fraud. And that, young lady, has quite serious legal consequences. A glimmer of fear crossed Patricia's face. Are you threatening me? We are offering you a way out, Charles Edward replied. Here's what will happen. You will sign a document prepared by Dr. Jeffrey, acknowledging your actions and committing never to approach my family again. In return, we will not file a formal complaint with the authorities. And if I refuse? Then the evidence we collected, recordings, emails, payment receipts to the fake doctor, will be forwarded to the district attorney's office, the lawyer explained. Attempting to obtain fraudulent guardianship of an elderly person, with the intent to appropriate their assets, is a serious crime. Patricia looked around, assessing Mrs. Eleanor's resolute expression, Charles Edward's disappointment, the lawyer's firmness and Iris's calm. She was cornered and she knew it. I'll sign whatever you want, she finally said, her voice cold. But know, Charles, that you are making the biggest mistake of your life. Under your mother's management, the Maxwell Company is becoming irrelevant in the market. In a few years, nothing will be left of the fortune your father built. Mrs. Eleanor smiled serenely. Perhaps you are right, Patricia. Perhaps I am indeed old-fashioned in my management. But do you know what my husband valued above profits? Integrity. The people who have worked for Maxwell for decades trust us, and that trust is worth more than any stock appreciation. Dr. Jeffrey extended the document to Patricia, along with a pen. She signed quickly without reading the details, eager to end the humiliation. Your belongings from the guest room have already been packed, Charles Edward informed her. A taxi is waiting to take you back to New York. All joint projects we had will be dissolved, and I request that you completely distance yourself from any business related to the Maxwell family. Patricia stood up, regaining some of her haughty composure. You'll regret this. Especially you, Charles. You'll never find anyone who cares as much about your future as I do. Caring about my financial future is not the same as caring about me, he replied calmly. That was the most valuable lesson I learned from all this. As Patricia collected her bag and prepared to leave, Iris approached Mrs. Eleanor, placing a hand on her shoulder in a gesture of silent support. The elderly woman covered Iris's hand with her own, a simple gesture that spoke volumes about the bond they had formed. Charles Edward escorted Patricia to the door, maintaining his dignity, despite the evident pain in his eyes. When he returned to the living room, he looked emotionally exhausted, as if he had aged years in a few hours. "It's done," he said, collapsing heavily onto the sofa. "I never imagined she was capable of something like this. Unfortunately, some money has the power to reveal the worst in people," Mrs. Eleanor commented, with the wisdom of someone who had lived long enough to see many masks fall. "But it can also reveal the best, as in the case of our Iris." Iris blushed slightly at the compliment. "I only did what any decent person would do, Mrs. Eleanor." "No, my dear," the elderly woman replied. "You did much more. You risked your job, your stability. You could have looked the other way, pretended not to see what was happening. Many would have done that. But you chose the harder path, the path of truth." Dr. Jeffrey, who had been observing the scene with interest, intervened. "Well, my part here is concluded. The document Ms. Vancroft signed is legally binding. If she tries anything in the future, we will have legal grounds to act." After the lawyer's departure, the three remained silent for a few moments, assimilating everything that had happened. It was Charles Edward who finally broke the silence. "Mother Iris, I owe both of you an apology. I was blind, negligent. I let Patricia distance me from my own family. I almost allowed her to destroy everything that Dad and you built." "The important thing is that you saw the truth in time," Mrs. Eleanor replied, with the generosity that had always characterized her. "And now we have the opportunity to start over, to rebuild our relationship as a family." Charles Edward looked at Iris, who remained discreetly beside Mrs. Eleanor. "And what about you, Iris? How can I thank you for everything you've done for my mother, for our family?" Iris smiled shyly. "You don't need to thank me, Mr. Charles. Mrs. Eleanor welcomed me when I arrived here with nothing. She gave me more than a job. She gave me a home. She gave me dignity. What I did was just to give back a little of what I received." In the weeks that followed, a visible transformation occurred in the Maxwell mansion. Charles Edward, deeply impacted by the experience, decided it was time to reevaluate his priorities. Instead of immediately returning to New York City, he temporarily moved into his mother's house, occupying the room that had been his during adolescence. "I need to reconnect with my roots," he explained one evening, as they dined on the veranda under the soft light of lanterns. "I spent too much time away, focused only on numbers, on financial growth. I forgot what truly matters." Mrs. Eleanor, visibly happy with her son's presence, flourished again. Her posture returned to being upright. Her eyes shone with renewed energy, and even her silver hair seemed more vibrant, as if the recent victory against adversity had rekindled her inner flame. Iris observed this rapprochement with genuine joy. Sometimes, while preparing breakfast, she heard the laughter of mother and son coming from the garden, where Charles Edward helped Mrs. Eleanor prune her rose bushes or feed the birds. It was as if time had rewinded, restoring bonds that seemed irremediably weakened. One afternoon, as Iris arranged flowers in the living room, Charles Edward approached with a thoughtful expression. "Iris, I'd like to talk to you about something important," he said, indicating that they should sit down. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened, about the way you protected my mother when I failed in that responsibility." "Mr. Charles, I already told you that you don't need to thank me." "It's not just thanks," he interrupted gently. "It's recognition. You did more for my mother than many relatives would. You created a bond of affection and trust with her that goes beyond the employee-employer relationship." Iris nodded, waiting for him to continue. "I've been talking with Mother about an idea I had," Charles Edward continued. "This whole situation with Patricia made me reflect on how many seniors are abandoned or mistreated, even by their own families. How many Mrs. Eleanors are out there, vulnerable, without someone like you to protect them?" "Unfortunately many," Iris agreed, remembering stories she had heard over the years. "Exactly. That's why I'm thinking of creating a community center for seniors here in New Orleans. A place where elderly people can spend the day, receive care, participate in activities, have companionship. A dignified, welcoming space that values their wisdom and experience. Iris's eyes lit up at the idea. That would be wonderful! Yes, and I want it to be free for those who cannot afford it, Charles Edward continued, enthusiastic. Initially funded by the foundation we will create in the Maxwell family's name. And do you know who I would like to be the honorary director? Mrs. Eleanor, Iris replied. Immediately, exactly. She has the experience, the necessary affection, and it would be a way to value everything she represents. And for deputy director, he smiled, I thought of you. Iris's eyes widened in surprise. Me? But Mr. Charles, I have no formal training. I'm just a courageous, intelligent, and compassionate woman, he completed. Someone who sees the value in people beyond appearances, who has a natural gift for caring and protecting. Of course, we will offer adequate training, capacity-building courses. But the essence of what is needed you already possess. Tears welled up in Iris's eyes. When she left Oak Creek, her only goal was to find decent work to support her children. She had never imagined that one day she would receive a proposal like that she would have the opportunity to make such a significant difference in the lives of so many people. I don't know what to say, she stammered, emotional. Say yes, Mrs. Eleanor's voice sounded from the living room door. She had overheard part of the conversation. Accept it, my dear. There is no one better for this role. That night during dinner, the three toasted to the future Maxwell Senior Community Center. Charles Edward explained more details of the project. It would be built on a plot of land the family owned in the Bywater neighborhood, would initially have the capacity to serve 100 seniors, would offer meals, basic medical assistance, adapted physical activities, cultural workshops, and even a small cinema for special screenings. Most importantly, he emphasized, it must be a place where seniors feel respected, valued, where they can share their stories, their wisdom, and also continue learning, growing, living fully. In the following months, the project quickly took shape. Charles Edward, having rediscovered his purpose, divided his time between managing the family businesses in New York and supervising the construction of the center in New Orleans. Architects were hired, gerontology specialists consulted, and the previously empty plot of land began to transform into a modern and welcoming complex. Mrs. Eleanor actively involved herself in every detail. She personally chose the furniture that would ensure comfort for future attendees, suggested activities based on her own preferences and needs, and even donated part of her book collection to the center's library. Iris, in turn, began a technical course in geriatric care, determined to live up to the responsibility entrusted to her. In her free time, she visited existing nursing homes and community centers, observing, learning, collecting ideas to implement in the new space. Her life experience, combined with her newly acquired technical knowledge, made her an exceptionally capable professional. While the community center took shape, another significant transformation occurred. Iris's children, who had remained in Oak Creek under their aunt's care, were brought to New Orleans. Charles Edward, recognizing the sacrifice the woman had made for his mother, insisted on enrolling them in a good school and offering them decent housing. It's the least I can do, he said, when Iris tried to refuse what she considered an excessive favor. Besides, it's not a favor. It's fair compensation for what you did for our family. Thus, the old staff quarters at the back of the Maxwell mansion were completely renovated and expanded, transforming into a comfortable house where Iris could finally reunite her family. For Mrs. Eleanor, having children again running through the gardens that had been silent for so long was like a breath of renewed life. They remind me of when Charles Edward was little, she commented one afternoon, tenderly watching Iris's children playing on the swing, hanging from the mango tree. The house needed that sound of children's laughter again. In early December, 1 year after Iris's arrival in New Orleans, the Maxwell Senior Community Center was officially inaugurated. The event, widely covered by local media, brought together authorities, business people, health professionals, and most importantly, dozens of seniors who had already registered to attend the space. Mrs. Eleanor, elegant in a turquoise blue dress that enhanced her eyes, cut the inaugural ribbon alongside Charles Edward and Iris. Her speech, brief but moving, touched the hearts of all present. This center is born from a story of affection and respect. It is born from the understanding that aging does not mean losing value or dignity. On the contrary, it means accumulating wisdom, experiences, stories that deserve to be heard and preserved. Here we want to create a space where our seniors can continue writing beautiful chapters of their lives, where they can find companionship, purpose, and, above all, the respect they deserve. Charles Edward, visibly moved, spoke next, publicly revealing the inspiration behind the project. This center exists today thanks to two extraordinary women. My mother, Eleanor, who with her strength and dignity taught me the true value of maturity, and Iris Spencer, who through her example of courage and loyalty showed me that family goes far beyond blood ties. It is built daily, through care, mutual respect, and genuine love. Over the following months, the Maxwell Community Center flourished, quickly becoming a reference in humanized care for seniors. Elderly people from various neighborhoods in New Orleans, especially those in vulnerable situations, found there not only assistance but a new meaning for their lives. Mrs. Sylvia, an 82-year-old lady who lived practically isolated after her children moved to other states, rediscovered her passion for painting in the art workshops. Mr. Anthony, a widower for a decade, formed a serenading group with other attendees, reviving songs from his youth. Mrs. Jasmine, with reduced mobility after a stroke, regained some of her movements thanks to the free physiotherapy sessions offered. Stories like these multiplied, deeply touching Mrs. Eleanor, Charles Edward, and especially Iris, who tirelessly coordinated the daily activities. "I never imagined we would help so many people," she commented one evening, as the three shared tea on the mansion's veranda, as had become tradition. "It's as if every smile I see there is a small victory." "And it is," Mrs. Eleanor agreed, her eyes shining with the serenity of someone who had found a greater purpose in life. "Every day that we provide dignity and joy to these seniors is a victory against abandonment, against forgetfulness." Charles Edward, who now divided his time between New York and New Orleans with much more balance, nodded thoughtfully. "You know what impresses me most? How something so positive was born from such a negative situation. If Patricia hadn't tried that terrible plan, God writes straight with crooked lines," Iris completed, with the simple wisdom that characterized her. "Sometimes we need to go through storms to find rainbows." On the center's 5th anniversary, the celebration was especially moving. What began as a single community space had expanded to 3 units in different neighborhoods of New Orleans, benefiting more than 500 seniors. In addition, the model had inspired similar initiatives in other cities in Louisiana, and even in other states. During the party, held in the spacious garden of the original unit, Charles Edward made an announcement that surprised everyone. "It is with immense joy that I share with you the next step of our project, the construction of the Iris Spencer Intergenerational Complex, which will include, in addition to space for seniors, a community daycare center, a small geriatric hospital, and assisted living residences for seniors who need continuous care. It will be the largest social investment ever made by the Maxwell Foundation." Iris, completely surprised to hear her name given to the new complex, could not hold back her tears. Mrs. Eleanor, by her side, held her hand tightly, her eyes also welling up with emotion. "You deserve it, my dear," the elderly woman whispered. "It was you who showed us the way." That night after the celebration, the 3, now truly a family, sat in the mansion's garden, among the rose bushes that Mrs. Eleanor and Iris tended together. The full moon bathed everything in its silvery light, creating an almost magical setting. Charles Edward poured champagne into 3 crystal glasses that had belonged to his father. Raising his glass, he proposed a toast. "To the family we chose, to the bonds we built, and to the certainty that, when we act with love and truth, good always prevails." The 3 glasses met in the air, sealing not only a toast, but the extraordinary journey they had shared, a journey that had transformed losses into gains, adversities into opportunities, and strangers into family. On the New Orleans horizon, the city lights twinkled like earthly stars, while in the hearts of those 3 people shone the certainty that they had found, each in their own way, the true meaning of home. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Iris, Mrs. Eleanor, and Charles Edward has touched your hearts, showing how loyalty and true love can overcome manipulation and greed. To continue experiencing emotions like this, we have a special playlist with other incredible stories of overcoming and hope. Find it by clicking here on the side. If you liked this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life and celebrate the strength of the human spirit. We await you in the comments to share your impressions of bonds of loyalty and suggest themes for our next narratives.